My daughter found a painting in our attic that won't stop her from crying. I just figured out the horrifying reason why she is crying. I was 25 and she was 23. We had been together for 6 or 8 months, depending on how you define together. At the time, I was living rent-free with my uncle and helping out at the pub that he owned at the edge of town. She, having moved to Prague about 6 months prior, was living in the center in an apartment that seemed nice at first but turned out to be occupied by sociopaths. When the tensions among her roommates exploded in a drunken night of shattered glass, she took it as her cue to move out. Security deposit be damned. We met the summer prior on the edge of town. She was a Euro-tripping American looking to discover the authentic corners of Prague, and I was excited to practice my English with a native speaker and serve someone who wasn't a grumpy old man. Originally, she was meant to spend 3 days in Prague, then move on to Budapest and then travel through the Balkans and fly back home through Prague. After the first night we spent together, she decided to skip Budapest. By the end of the week the Balkans were a purely theoretical place. When it was time for her to fly back home, she dawdled and almost missed her flight. It wasn't until we were sweaty and out of breath at the security check that she told me that she had decided to move to Prague. She didn't want to rush things with me, she said. Right after graduation she had moved in with her high school boyfriend and the blisters from that mistake were fresh. For 2 months of daily calls and emails and photos, we ironed out the details of our relationship. We were taking things slow. When her roommate turned out to be a bottle-throwing maniac, we sped up a bit. We moved in together the spring of 2014. That's the first time I saw the painting. I didn't pay much attention to the decor of the apartment when we first moved in. I was just happy to be with her. I was just happy to feel like an adult in a stable relationship. It wasn't until a lazy Sunday evening, when she fell asleep on the couch after we watched something streamable, that I noticed the painting. A lush field of wheat on a bright summer day. In the distance, there sat a humble little cottage. In the foreground, a father and his 3 children worked at the fields. They stood on their hind legs and worked at the wheat with human tools, but the creatures were mouse-like in their appearance. The painting didn't fit in with the rest of the modern apartment. Everything else came directly off the discount rack in IKEA, but the canvas that rested above our television was wholly original. Oil paint, detailed to an astounding degree, the mice people in the field seemed to move ever so gently. I remember being taken by the painting for a while, trying to understand what it meant or how the artist had captured such lifelike motion. But then she started to gently snore on my shoulder and I was far too in love to keep my attention steady. The painting would occasionally catch my eye while I was cooking or ironing clothes. Whenever we were watching streamables and the question of whether we should let the next episode play or go to sleep came up, I would find my eyes drifting to the mouse people, as if seeking their guidance. They seemed happy back then. The painting interested me, but back then it was just a passing interest. Life in the center took up most of my attention. I had gotten a new job and that was somewhat stressful, but I was beyond ecstatic to get out of the cement shackles of the outskirts. The Art Nouveau, the bars, the concerts under my windows, my new address made me fall in love with the city in a way I didn't think possible. I got to see Prague from a whole new different angle and she was there with me to experience every last bit of it. A couple times, we talked about getting married to make the immigration process easier. It was usually meant in jest, but we still talked about it with straight faces. The first 6 months we spent in that small apartment were sheer bliss, but then, well, something went wrong. It could have been the product launch at work that nearly drove me into a nervous breakdown. It could have been our honeymoon period running out. It could have been that she was just getting tired of Prague. Either way, we found ourselves slowly becoming strangers to each other. This all happened nearly a decade ago, so you'll excuse me if I forget the details. I only vaguely remember the slow dread of drifting apart. The painting is what I remember with painful sharpness. It happened the first time I tried having a serious conversation about our future. That night, I asked a lot of questions and received a lot of sad shrugs in response. It was after one of those quiet stabs to the heart that I found my eyes wandering. Weren't there always 3 mouse kids? I remember asking. For a moment her face lost its sadness and turned to confusion. What? She asked. On the painting, it was always the dad mouse and 3 kids, right? Now there's only 2. It wasn't just the missing mouse though. There seemed to be a shift in the skies of the painting. The wheat no longer shined with the golden hue of the summer sun. Storm clouds were gathering off in the distance. The mouse people no longer seemed excited about their labor and, I was almost sure of it, one of them was missing. I don't know. Never paid attention to the painting. Sorry, she said, and then, with a sigh, she nudged the conversation back towards the topics neither of us wanted to discuss. We broke up about a week later. I moved back in with my uncle. She stayed in the apartment. Most of my stuff was still in the center, so, about once a week, I would drop by to chip away at the sluggish task of moving via subway. I'd always go over when I knew she was at work and I'd make my visits as swift as possible as to not allow myself to wonder about how her life was going without me. After a month of my periodic relocation, all that was left in the apartment was a pot, 2 pans and a paperback or 2. I went to grab the rest of my things on Czechoslovakian Independence Day, finding a nice bit of irony in it. I was so satisfied with my dramatic scheduling that I completely forgot that she'd get the day off from work as well. To my surprise, she was in much better spirits than the last time we met. We got to talking about things unrelated to us and then we picked up a bottle of white from the winery downstairs. After a couple hours we grabbed a second. My books and pan stayed put that night. For the next couple of weeks, we relit whatever spark our relationship had lost. It was as if the past couple of months had been spliced out of the film reel of our lives. We went on trips out into the country together. We spent countless hours laughing and sharing the obscure details of our lives. The sex was as blissful as it was the summer we first met. Throughout our little post-breakup honeymoon, the painting stopped bothering me. It was still drawn with style and care which defied all expectations, and there were still only 2 mouse children in the field, but the wheat shined with a golden prosperity once more. We were happy. For a while we started joking about getting married again. Yet, as is the tendency of post-breakup relationships, our moment passed. Like a Morse code call for help, our time together became punctuated by empty silence. Eventually, That plea descended into complete darkness in another night of slow and difficult conversations. As we sat on the couch and slowly shuffled towards the realization that we have no future together, I once again found my eyes drifting towards the painting. The hue of the fields turned cold once more. Off in the distance, by the cottage of the mouse people, I spotted a little clump of rocks and a cross that had not been there before. That night, our relationship breathed its last breath. That ending hurt, but it didn't hurt as much as the first one. Perhaps, somewhere deep inside, I knew that we were not meant to last. Perhaps, it was the strangeness of the painting that lessened the sting of the breakup. It all hurt, obviously, yet as I rode my 2 a.m. Uber back to the outskirts with my collection of paperbacks and pans, I didn't think much of her. I thought about the mouse people. I thought about the little grave next to the cottage. I was certain it was never there before. I was certain the painting was changing in front of my eyes. We kept radio silence for about a week. I retreated back to the outskirts and nursed my wounds among towers of cement. I had resolved to avoid the neighborhood in which she lived to keep the stitches around my heart from splitting, but soon enough that resolve proved to be pointless. Prague had turned sour for her. She was moving back to the States. There was still 6 months left in the contract on the apartment and someone needed to replace her name. The last time we met, the change in the painting was undeniable. The warm summer sun was blotted out by dark storm clouds. The fields of wheat which were once bountiful grew sparse and diseased. The father and his 2 mouse children had ceased their labor and shed their smiles. The mouse people stood on the road leading to a broken-down cottage, their heads bowed in sorrow and their eyes void of hope. Her bags were already packed and sitting by the door. She was not interested in talking about the painting. She wasn't interested in talking at all. The changes in the art defied all reason and sent my mind down paths that didn't belong. Briefly, I considered whether she was not changing out the pictures whenever I left the apartment. I asked. There was no motive for her to try to drive me insane, and that sort of malice would have been deeply uncharacteristic of her, but I still asked. She did not respond. She just looked at me as if I had turned into a complete stranger. We sat there in silence, our shared history slowly being wiped away by pain until her Uber notification went off. I helped her with her suitcases. After an anemic hug she got in the car. I never saw her again. The thought of the painting being a part of some bizarre prank didn't seem likely the day I asked it. By the end of the week, it became unthinkable. The painting continued to grow darker and darker. The wheat turned sicklier by the day and the attention of the mouse family slowly turned from their dying fields to the world beyond the painting. They stared at me. They started at me with their beady eyes full of sorrow, as if I was responsible for their suffering. They stared at me and their stares brewed a deep guilt within my stomach. I wanted to remove the painting from the wall back then, but the breakup had sucked away all of my resolve. My diet started to consist wholly of ordered food and I scarcely ever visited the living room or kitchen anymore. The painting was still in the back of my mind. I would still occasionally catch glimpses of its ever-worsening visage, yet life kept me busy enough for it to slowly fade from my attention. I had a job to focus on. I had a life to live. It wasn't until a season later that the painting took center stage of my attention again. I had attended the birthday party of an old high school classmate and befriended his cousin to a degree where she wanted to visit my home after all the bars had shut. I was not prepared for visitors that night. My bedroom was a mess. My new friend would be unimpressed by my growing collection of takeout boxes around my bed, so, to prevent any feelings of repulsion, I settled down with her on the couch in the living room. For a while, things were going smoothly. My new friend and I had comfortably settled down and were drunkenly exploring each other's bodies. But then, with a discomforting suddenness, I felt her body tense under my hands. When I asked her what was wrong, she slowly nodded towards the painting. Even in the faint reflected light of the street lamps outside, you could see them. The tortured mouse family stood at the foreground of the painting. They all looked hungry, very hungry, yet the mouse children seemed to be balancing the edge between starvation and death. Their father had his skeletal arms around them, holding them upright. All 3 of them looked out to the world beyond the painting with hungry, sunken eyes, begging for deliverance from their suffering. To ease her discomfort, I took the painting off the wall and rested it face down in the hallway. That did not help. All the sex had dissipated from the room the moment she noticed the starving mouse folk. Soon enough, she was ordering an Uber back home. It was getting late, after all. When she was gone, I cleared the takeout boxes off my bed and tried to get some shut-eye. When my mind refused to calm, I mixed myself a nightcap. When even that didn't help, I gathered up all of the takeout boxes and took them out to the recyclables. Along with the countless greasy paper bags, I also disposed of the painting. I had hoped that getting the painting out of the house would calm me, but it didn't. Instead of going to sleep, I found myself hovering by the window, looking out at the containers. Even at a distance, I could sense the mouse folk looking at me. I could sense them blaming me for their suffering. The presence of the painting in my apartment had made me uncomfortable for months, but the sight of it by the trash somehow felt worse. The thought of it rotting in some landfill made me nauseous. The mouse folk were harrowing to look at, but I was certain that they were alive. They stared up into my window from by the trash cans. They were pleading for help. I was responsible for them. With the sun starting to rise over Prague and a hangover slowly hatching behind my eyes, I left the house one final time. I didn't hang the painting back on the wall. Instead, I placed it in the closet, facing away from me. The thought of getting rid of the painting felt patently cruel, but I wasn't going to let it chase away guests again. When I woke in the late afternoon, my sheets were drenched in sweat and my heart was pounding. I dreamt terrible dreams that night. I dreamt, in discomforting detail, of the mouse folk. I stood with them in their barren fields. They reached out to me with trembling fingers eaten away at by hunger. They begged and pleaded with me in a soft language I could not comprehend. I stood in their broken world and, for a while, I feared that I would never be allowed to leave. The dream was discomfortingly vivid and when I woke, it took me many breaths to find my bearing. Yet, once the terror of my sleep wore off and I got some coffee in my system, the lazy Sunday evening soothed my spirit. Hidden in the closet, the painting stayed out of sight and out of mind. Whenever I was cleaning the apartment, I would see the back of the frame when retrieving the vacuum. I would never turn it around. I would never spare it a second look. I couldn't abide by the painting ending up in the trash, but the less I knew about it, the happier I was. The years passed on. It took a while for me to shake off the heartbreak and the general discomfort the past year had instilled in me, but soon enough the thoughts of my American affair, or the painting, slid away. I met another woman, a woman who would soon become my wife. We lived together in the apartment and then, our little family grew. Our daughter wasn't planned, but she was loved. Before she could walk, the humble pad in the city center suited us just fine. But as time wore on, it became clear that there were better places to raise a child. The air was smoggy and the trams were loud and the nearest park was too distant to be a daily attraction. Eventually, my family retreated from whence I came, back to the outskirts. We moved past the cement housing projects and into the quiet suburbia of family homes. Briefly, I considered leaving the painting behind, but it didn't feel right. Without checking if the canvas had changed, I threw a tarp over it and deposited it in our new attic. Hidden out of sight, the painting slipped my mind completely. For years and years, I completely forgot about my old relationship or the queer mouse folk. It wasn't until this morning that I found myself looking in those harrowed eyes again. I woke to a scream from the attic. I've told my daughter 100 times that she's not allowed to play up there, but she's never been a particularly obedient child. The moment I heard her, I rushed up the stairs as fast as I could. I had feared an injury, but the moment I saw the tarp on the floor I knew something worse had happened. Over the years, the painting had continued to change. The fields had wilted into dead earth. The humble cottage in the distance was laid low into kindling. The mouse father held his children in his skeletal arms, yet they no longer seemed alive. His tortured eyes stared out into the world. Bloodshot and sunken and pleading, the mouse father looked at me. My daughter is still shaken. My wife insists the painting be thrown away immediately, but I can't bring myself to dispose of it. I can't bear the sight of the suffering mouse folk peeking out of a landfill. Something deep inside of me doesn't want to get rid of the painting. Its existence makes my skin crawl, but the idea of it being thrown out is significantly more unpalatable. There's a part of me that feels responsible for the mouse folk on the canvas, but now, there's something significantly more disturbing that I see in the painting. One of the mouse children looks exactly like my daughter. In November of 1999, I went missing for 3 days from the basement of my childhood home. The things I saw will leave me traumatized for life. As a young child, I was abducted from the basement of my childhood home and taken somewhere that I still struggle to quantify or explain. I suppose this is my attempt to put down as honestly as possible what happened to me and hoping open-minded individuals might find this story. This was well over 20 years ago. I was 8 years old with 2 siblings. My older sister, Denise, was 10, and my younger brother, Howie, would have been 5. We had a very conventional American Midwestern upbringing. My parents were fairly happy and we all shared a beautiful home in a nice neighborhood, riding the high of 90s consumerism. My childhood was extremely happy up until a certain point. Things changed when my sister and I created an anomaly, a haunting of sorts, in the closet of our playroom as children. The dolls assembled in the closet we had designated as the Barbie Theater and took their seats. The spooks and thrills we felt began to elevate as the first choreographed spooky occurrences interrupted our peaceful cinema-attending dolls. My sister was the architect of this story and I followed along, absolutely terrified. Tensions grew as the story built to the crescendo. Woody from Toy Story was possessed by a demon and rose from his seat, high into the air, turning to gaze at the audience. Bedlam has been established for the crowd of Barbies and our pretend fear had become quite real. Our emotions were palpable as the Barbies began their exorcism, calling for Satan to leave Woody as he began to shake and convulse before the theater screen. We snapped back to reality when the room suddenly went dark for a split second and the light began flashing rapidly. Denise and I turned to each other and screamed, clutching one another in desperation. Our senses came back to us quickly. Mom was unamused, standing in the doorway of the playroom switching the light on and off, informing us she'd been calling down the stairs for 5 minutes and we can't just get sucked into games when we have to go brush our teeth and get ready for bed. Holding hands, Denise and I ran out in front of Mom so she would create a buffer between us and the looming unknown of the basement stairs when the lights went off. One of the most agonizing parts of my childhood was that very real fear of monsters and demons snatching at my heels every time I flew up the stairs after playtime, and that night it was an especially present sensation. Admittedly, parts of my memories have faded. I'm rusty on the exact order of things, but I remember the hole in the wall showed up closely enough after the haunted movie theater game that I connected the two events in my mind. Denise and I made a spooky story for the closet and a few days later, a spooky dark hole showed up on the wall on the other side of the closet. It just made sense to me. Howie actually noticed the hole first. I got home from school and Mom asked me to get Howie from the basement where he was playing. Going to the stairs, I looked down and saw Howie was hunkered into the corner that was a few feet from the bottom of the stairs. He was on his hands and knees with his ear pressed to the floor, like he was looking for something underneath a shelf, except it was just the wall. I wasn't too thrown off by this. Howie was 5 and a weirdo to boot, so I yelled down at him to come upstairs. My mother said from the other room to actually go get him and to not just yell. Rolling my eyes, I made my way down the stairs to Howie, who still was not acknowledging me in any way. When I got to him, I placed my hand on his back and he jolted like he was startled. I asked him what he was looking at and he got up off of his hands, and while sitting on his knees, he pointed to a hole in the corner. It was about the size and shape as if someone had ripped the corner off a playing card and traced it out. Inside it was pitch black, somehow blacker than black. Something about it made my tummy hurt. I asked him what was in there. He calmly told me there was a funny person in there, hiding in the wall. My tummy ache lurched and I almost vomited when he said that. I'm sure an adult would have written that off as childish imagination, but as a child with an imagination myself, I immediately took him at face value. There was someone hiding in the wall. Up until that moment, the most scared I had ever been was the other day playing in the closet with my sister. More scared than when a thunderstorm took out the power and a tree branch broke through my bedroom window. More scared than sneaking behind the couch while my parents watched Interview with a Vampire last Halloween. The moment Howie said what he said, that became the most scared I'd ever been. Every fiber of my being was screaming to get away. I grabbed Howie by the arm. I could hear him complain, but couldn't understand him through my adrenaline. It felt animalistic. I ran up the stairs, dragging poor Howie behind me. I slammed the basement door and ran to Mom, Howie still in tow, and I began wailing to her about a man in the walls downstairs. My poor mother was completely confused. I had been fine just a minute ago and she had been downstairs numerous times throughout the day doing laundry and had noticed nothing awry. I was finally able to calm my tears enough to explain to her what I found Howie doing and what he had said about someone in the walls. She laughed and explained it was impossible because it was a basement, an unfinished basement. To be exact, she explained to me all of the exterior walls were cement bricks with dirt on the other side. The wall to our playroom was just wood and drywall. There was only a few inches of space. Definitely not room enough for funny people to hide. She tried to reassure me by going down, but as soon as she walked towards the basement door, I began to wail again. Seeing that wasn't going to help, she made me a snack and had me sit and watch cartoons with Howie and Denise. I was beginning to relax by the time my dad came home. We had supper and Mom told Dad about the hole in the wall downstairs. Dad was a contractor, so he felt quite confident doing the repair. He used a moisture meter to ensure a leak hadn't caused the hole. When a water source had been eliminated as the culprit, he figured one of us had kicked a hole in the wall and did not want to fess up, so he patched the drywall. Good as new. With a reassuring kiss on the head, he later told me he had it covered and that he checked and there was no one in there. I slept peacefully that night and over the next few days, the discomfort I felt while in the basement waned slightly. I still refused to be down there by myself, but Denise and I almost always played together so it was rarely an issue. Until Denise had to go to the bathroom one day. I wanted to go up with her, but we were in the middle of creating an easy bake oven confection and she wanted me to stay to watch and make sure it didn't burn. I felt great apprehension and told her we could unplug the oven and then plug it back in when we got back. Denise called me the B word, baby. My pride was devastated and my fate was sealed. I committed to my easy bake vigil and Denise was up the stairs, leaving a very heavy silence in the playroom. I tried to keep my mind occupied, reading the directions on the box for the cake mix and then fussing around with a random Barbie. A feeling like I was being watched appeared suddenly in my consciousness. I dutifully tried to ignore it as I felt my heart beat faster and my discomfort rapidly grew. I threw myself harder into my Barbie fussing, dragging that useless plastic brush over her tangled locks, wondering what was taking Denise so long. Behind me, I heard a noise, like a light click or a tap. I froze over the easy bake, my eyes wide. I had definitely not heard my sister come back down the stairs and Howie wasn't even in the house. I heard the sound again. It was coming from the closet. A brief description of the closet: unfinished, lined with particle board. It was maybe 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep. It had no doors. We had play clothes and some winter clothes hung up for storage. Underneath it were some boxes stacked up and the other half of the closet was a jumbled pile of toys and stuffed animals. It had only been maybe a week since we cleared it out for the doll theater, but it was packed full again. I was absolutely petrified and I wanted to run away, but the closet and the door were in the same wall, so I would have to run closer to the closet to leave, which freaked me out. The sound continued from behind me and as if I was under the Pied Piper's spell, I felt my head turn, leading my eyes to see what was producing the noise. When the closet came into my view, it took me a moment to see through the visual noise of the clutter and find the source of the tapping. My mind processed what I was seeing and I began to scream uncontrollably. Feet and legs were underneath me before I even was aware I was moving, fleeing, flying up the stairs. Screaming. I couldn't stop screaming. When I had turned around and looked behind me in the playroom, sticking out from under the hanging clothes and jackets, was a black and skeletal hand, almost like a mummy, pinching a Barbie high heel between its fingers and walking the shoe across the boxes. Howie was right. There was someone in the walls. Dad and Denise went down to investigate for me and they were unable to find anyone. Later that night, though, Denise came into my room with her hands behind her back and tears in her eyes. I asked what was wrong and without saying a word, she produced her left hand and opened it. A mint green Barbie heel lay in her palm. I immediately felt very uncomfortable and I asked her if that was the one from her jewelry chest. She shook her head and brought out her other hand and revealed an identical mint shoe. Denise explained the second one was the one from her bedroom, the first one she had found on the boxes in the basement closet. We were both incredibly scared. Despite having a lavish doll and wardrobe situation, we only had one pair of mint green heels, one of which we both knew I had lost during a road trip at a McDonald's in Georgia last year. It had caused a huge fight between us because those heels went perfectly with Denise's favorite doll dress and she had melodramatically stored the other shoe in her jewelry box as a sign of reverence. Yet here we sat with what to us felt like extremely convincing evidence of supernatural occurrences we could not begin to rationalize. We didn't even discuss it. Denise stayed in my bed with me that night and I honestly think we hardly slept. We were so afraid. After that, we avoided the basement at all costs. It had always been a little spooky down there, but it had quickly surpassed the creepy tolerances of little girls that wanted to play with dolls and host story time for their stuffed animals. We'd planned recon missions ahead of time for toys we wanted, begging our parents to come down with us while we snatched the toys we needed that day and fled back to the safety of the upstairs. My mother is a neat freak and didn't appreciate our messy and toy-cluttered bedrooms, so that coddling did not last long. We were allowed to keep a streamlined collection of toys upstairs, but the rest had to be returned to the playroom. Denise and I were still so scared of the basement that we chose to stop playing with the majority of our toys. We pursued other endeavors, reading together or practicing gymnastic tumbles in the yard or watching cartoons. I had done a very successful job skirting around the basement and had not gone down there alone since the night I saw the hand. I had hardly been down there at all, even with a chaperone. That changed one cold and bitter November morning. Mom was very busy, as both Denise and Howie had gotten really sick. She had been running around all night taking care of them, and that morning she had Howie in a cool bath trying to get his fever down. She was on the phone with the doctor in the bathroom. I could hear the gratitude and relief in her voice when they could get Howie in soon to see the doctor. Calling me into the bathroom, she explained that she knew I was scared of the closet downstairs, but she had to watch Howie and needed me to go into the basement and get their coats out of the closet. My initial reaction was to balk and protest, perhaps too vehemently. Mom called me the B word. Brave. My fate was decided. Steeling myself at the top of the stairs, I tried to cling to the bravery instilled inside me by my mother, but with each step down, I felt it evaporate. Halfway down the stairs I noticed the hole was back in the corner. Fighting every instinct in my body, I made myself go down the stairs. It was daylight out, but overcast, so the entire basement had a gloomy light about it from the small windows around the ceiling. I didn't like the way it made the shadows look inky and mysterious. I pressed my back to the handrail as hard as I could when I got to the end of the stairs, giving myself as much space as possible from the hole while sidestepping to the playroom door. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room, resolute. I knew what I had to do. I knew exactly where their coats were. I needed only to reach out and snatch them off their hangers and then run like hell. Except, when I got myself in front of the closet, I couldn't see anyone's coats. I froze, unsure what to do. I knew they were in there, nestled behind the play clothes and snow pants were our winter coats, but I absolutely did not want to put my hands in there to find them. My plan had depended on visibility and accessibility. Weighing my options, I decided the worst outcome was disappointing Mom. I gingerly reached out and tugged on the hem of an old bridesmaid dress, guiding it out of the way. Feeling slightly more emboldened after not seeing the hand appear, I very cautiously grabbed the leg of my snow pants and saw with relief the sleeve of my mother's coat underneath. Reaching out to her coat, I felt time slow as I saw the hand suddenly burst out through the clothes, snatching my wrist with surprising strength and firmness. Despite the papery and dusty appearance of the hand, it was quite solid. Barely enough time to whimper, I was yanked into the clothes. I felt my legs scrape over the boxes and I was suddenly in a place in between, not between the closet and the wall, but I think a place between dimensions. Discomfort was my physical baseline there. I don't believe my form was intended to be in that plane. Every inch of my body had what felt like a cold gelatinous layer over it. Breathing felt like static. Despite my physical discomfort, my fear quickly dissipated. My emotions were muted, placidity dominated. I could only feel the faintest flutter of curiosity about where I had found myself. Any worry or anxiety felt like it was floating 10 feet below me underwater. Keeping any train of thought became challenging. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the darkness of this place and pinpricks of light appeared throughout the never-ending darkness, like stars in the sky. The closest light to me looked like a hole in the wall. With dreamy bemusement, I realized it was the hole in our basement wall. The light was enough to illuminate the figure that had dragged me here, and that's exactly all it was, just a figure. Humanoid, completely black, featureless, not even eyes. It looked more like a silhouette than a solid being in this realm, compared to its charcoal appearance outside.